At Charity Charge, our mission is to power yours. Most banks and financial service providers weren't built for nonprofits. They don't understand your structure or how you operate. That's why we exist. We proudly serve more than 3,000 organizations across the US, offering tools built exclusively for the sector. From credit cards and expense management to bookkeeping and gift cards, every solution is designed to help you minimize operations and supercharge your impact. And we're more than just financial services. We're an educational community. We share resources every day on our podcast, blog, and webinars to help you stay informed, compliant, and empowered. Visit charitycharge.com to learn more and join the community.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Charity Charge Show. I'm your host, Stephen Garton. Today, I'm very excited to bring on Vu Lei, who is the founder of nonprofitaf.com. Vu, thank you so much for being here with us today. I wanted to start off. Can you just share? I know we just chatted a little bit, getting to know each other about your background. I definitely want to get into Nonprofit AF, talk about why you started that and all the things that you've learned along the way. My goal really with this episode is we work with about 3,000 nonprofits. And I think that you have seen both in your firsthand experience before starting Nonprofit AF and then in running Nonprofit AF, so many unique insights into how individuals are running nonprofits, the challenges they face, and how to overcome some of those challenges. So, first question really for you is how did you get into the nonprofit world?
Yeah, I was actually pre-med. I went to WashU, which I know you also graduated from, and
Yes.
I was
You
going to
say
be a
"Go
doctor.
Bears" or something.
Yes, go Bears. Yeah, I was going to be a doctor, and then I realized I didn't really want to be a doctor, and I wanted to do something that was different, that was more community focused. So I got a degree in social work, and then I couldn't find any work, so I got into the AmeriCorps program and spent a couple of years at a small organization that was supporting refugees and immigrants, and then became the executive director after a couple of years of that organization, and so that kind of started my path down into this field.
And what inspired you to start Nonprofit AF?
It was a
What was the
funder.
okay.
Yeah, a funder came to me and was like, "Vu, would you mind writing a blog post for our website?" And because of power dynamics and stuff, you can't really say no to a funder, right? Especially if they're funding you, which we can address. So I said, "Okay,
Yes.
but do you mind if I make it like light and funny?" And they're like, "No, that'll be good. It'll be good to have something light and funny." So I wrote my first sort of blog post for their website, and it was about like how we nonprofits tend to hoard things because we have a scarcity mindset. And so if anyone gives you like 1,000 colored pencils or whatever, you're like, okay, sure, we'll take it. And then you have no idea what to do with it. But like this is why we have so many like crappy chairs and things that we don't get rid of because like we have this tendency to hoard things. Anyways, that kind of started it. People appreciated this sort of humorous tone that I was putting out there, and then it kind of spun off into nonprofit AF.
How did you as it grew, right? Because I've known of the brand Nonprofit AF for many, many years now. How did you start to get the word out, and how was it also maybe some organic of nonprofits finding out about your blog?
It was actually all organic because I'm terrible at marketing. What I find is if you are consistent, so I made a commitment that I was gonna write a blog post every single Monday, rain or shine, except for a couple of years like around the holidays, where I would not do that. And so after like maybe 30 years, 30 posts or so, people started paying attention. And they're like, "Oh, this guy's pretty consistent, and what he has to say is not boring." So I think people started kind of subscribing, and it started snowballing that way.
What in doing it from when you started it to where you are now 5 years later, what are some of the big picture themes? I know we're gonna talk a bit about your book as well, which I'm sure a lot have captured there, and we can also kinda jump to that. From when you started it, right, to now 6 years later, what are some of the big themes that have emerged that you've seen organizations wanna talk about, find interest in, struggle with?
Yeah, it's actually been like 14 years. Actually, I've been
Oh my
writing. It's
gosh.
been like
I was I gotta do better research. I was just going by
no, 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 no. You're not
I
wrong.
was
You're not wrong.
surprised on the LinkedIn, it says 2020, but in doing Charity Charge for almost 10 years now, I almost thought I had come across it before. So, yeah, going on 16 years, that's incredible.
Yeah, no, it was because I changed the branding. It was originally called Nonprofit with Balls, but then I got feedback, and it was about all the balls that we juggle all the time.
Sure.
Financing, all
I
this
think
stuff.
you're a better marketer than you give yourself credit for. It's great to have
Yeah,
something, catchy, that catches people.
Yeah, but in 2016, I changed it to nonprofit AF, and so it's been under that brand since then.
I should say too, in 16 years, right? As we've seen
Yeah.
different changes in the world, work from home, internet marketing, things like that. What are those themes? But also, yeah, what's your perspective on what has or hasn't changed in terms of the challenges that nonprofit leaders face over those 16 years?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what has not changed is the importance of nonprofits and how vital they are to the communities, right? In the book, I liken our sector to air, whereas other sectors are like food. You know, people can see food, they appreciate food, and food is can be is important. But nonprofits are like air, and no one appreciates air because it's oftentimes invisible, and you don't appreciate it until it's just not there anymore, and you realize that you can't breathe, right? So the sector has always been really vital, but at the same time, we also have a lot of challenges that we constantly face, and it hasn't really changed much over the past 16 years since I've been writing about it. For example, we still have lots of funding challenges. We still have this Hunger Games that we play with one another regarding resources. We have restrictions from funders. Like funders are still obsessed over overhead, and some of them don't want to fund overhead. They want to pay for operations or salaries or whatever. They just want to pay for direct things. I liken it to, I don't know, like I don't know, like a firefighter. Like nonprofits are firefighters trying to put out the fires, and every 3 or 4 steps, someone stops them and are like, "Hey, I want to make sure that the money I'm giving you to put out the fires is being spent on the water, but not the hose." Like, what is your hose to water ratio? You know, like we have to deal with that stuff all the time, and it has not changed very much at all. Yeah, but there's still amazing things that continue to happen that has not changed. Nonprofits continue to do important work.
When you hear some of those challenges, what has been your advice or how have you seen nonprofits circumvent that, right? Because there's sort of like the box that we live in this world, right? And we want to make, if we have a vision, there are ways to break outside of the box and change things. But sometimes also you have to operate in the box you're in for the time being. So I'm just curious, how have you seen nonprofits successfully navigate that?
Yeah, well,
What
there's
kinda
lots
and
of
what kinda
things.
conversations do they need to have with their funders?
Well, we're talking about funding and changing funder behavior. We have to try different strategies, right? So some of it is like you need to give direct feedback to funders. I think we lie to funders a lot, and we've been trained to tell them half truths. So when they ask like, "Oh, how are things going?" We've been terrified to tell them, "Yeah, everything is really shitty," because we're afraid that they're going to remove funding. To be fair, many of them do. They're very risk averse. So, but we need to do a much better job communicating with them. We also need to organize better. So it's easier for us to speak in groups. Like over here, 180 EDs got together and wrote an open letter to the funders saying that they need to get out more money. It needs to be multi-year, it needs to be general operating, and asked a bunch of funders to like sign a pledge saying that they're going to do it. Right. So like collective organizing, we're gonna need to do a lot more of. But also we had to start thinking about other more radical tools. Like I think about like the movement that I started called Crappy Funding Practices, where we name and shame funders on social media when they do time wasting shenanigans. Like there was one funder who was boasting that they had 1,000 applicants. They're like, oh, we got 4,000 applicants. And all they did was give out 6 grants of $500 each. So if you calculate how many hours it takes, even if it only takes, like 2 or 3 hours to do this one grant, you've wasted like 400 hours, just so many hours of people's time, and it's terrible. So we call them out by name on LinkedIn, and there's a group of volunteers who do that, and it's fun
I
and
wanna
needed.
go into the specifics of that. We're gonna get to that list, but I'm curious, I mean, that's, like, even some practical stuff. If there's a nonprofit that's listening here, not that I coined it by any means, but kind of the shiny object syndrome. I've seen that a lot in the nonprofits that we've worked with, where they put in so much time and so much effort to throw whether it's an event or it's a grant, but to get so little in return. So, what would it sounds like you're saying that before a nonprofit just goes sees a grant and applies, what are some of the things that they should be asking or looking out for?
Well, I mean, there's certain things like we have been trained to do the research and to build relationships with funders and so on. Don't write a grant unless you are pretty sure. Maybe you've talked to a program officer and so on. But what I'm more interested in is like all these different philosophies that have been holding us back, that we've
Mhm.
internalized without even realizing it. So, for example, the philosophy that this is other people's money, that we should be grateful for any amount of money that we get from a funder or from a donor. But the reality is that, at least in the United States, a lot of wealth in this country has been built through inequitable means, including slavery, stolen indigenous land, worker exploitation, environmental degradation, and tax avoidance. So it's really not other people's money. Like, if they're not paying their fair share of taxes, then it's not their money. So, like, get out of this mindset that this is other people's money. Because when you have this philosophy that it's other people's money, then you feel really tentative when you apply for it. You become very deferential, and we need to get out of that mindset. The other one is that there's only so much money to go around. Funders will say this all the time, like, because of limited resources, we can only select a few nonprofits. Well, that's bullshit. There's like over $1.7 trillion just sitting in endowments and donor advice funds right now. Like, just sitting there, because most foundations only give out 5%, which is the legal
By
minimum.
law, yeah, and it's the average of 5% over the prior 3 years.
Yes. And so their endowments keep growing, and they're saving up for a rainy day because they believe in this ridiculous notion of perpetuity, right? Where they can just like exist forever so they can solve future problems. But future problems are caused by the existing problems that we don't solve. It's like, again, if everything is on fire and they're only giving out 5% of the water to put out the fires, then the fires keep spreading. And they don't seem to understand that. Even like right now with like the rise of fascism, like they're still hoarding money.
Are you from
So yeah.
to go a bit deeper here with you, and I'm curious because I don't know a ton about it, but there is a side that I believe foundations outside of that 5% will, and maybe it's just a PR thing, but make PRI, program related investments, where I've seen, foundations will use some of the other 95%. So obviously with the bulk of that 95%, I mean, they're putting money into private equity, venture capitalist, stocks, crypto, whatever, but
Fossil
they can
fuel,
carve out a
yeah.
yeah. So have you seen any models or any successes of groups accessing some of that 95%?
I am not an expert in the 95% and how funders invest their endowments. I know that a lot of them invest
I
them
think it's a
in
small
shitty things.
amount, but I think it's a small amount, but I think that there could be a lot more conversation and ingenuity. And part of where I'm perhaps putting this out for you or for anyone listening, and I got to refresh myself as well, but I have seen foundations invest on the PRI side into redeveloping nonprofits that were redeveloping neighborhoods and building community centers because they were actually able to make a case to the foundation to put money basically as a I think the nonprofit I spoke with was getting it at a 2% interest rate, but it was paid back over a 30-year period. We're going down a little bit of a deeper thing, but it just opens my eyes to other ways that organizations can think about how to access more capital.
No, yeah, I mean, we can talk about it, but I generally dislike this sort of idea of foundations as banks,
Mhm.
and nonprofits need to be like an investment that generates a return on revenues and all this stuff. The way that we've been thinking about this is why progressive movements uh have fallen behind for decades. I don't think conservative funders often think like this, right? There, in the book, I mentioned the differences between conservative funders and progressive funders and how they fund and how they think about things. Conservative funders fund 20 or 30 years at a time. And they invest in, there's all general operating funds. They invest in institutions like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the Federalist Society, and so on. They invest in cultural warriors. So they invest in individuals who are brilliant. That's why we can name 20 or 30 conservative pundits, and we can barely name anyone on the progressive side right now who has the same influence, right? They invest in the media. They put out like 5 times more in social media content than progressives do. They control Fox and Sinclair and all this stuff. In the meanwhile, and they also buy politicians. They pack the Supreme Court and all judicial, levels with judges and lawyers who are right wing. Right? We refuse to do any of these things. And meanwhile, we're focused on things like, oh, what can we do? How do we hoard all this money and this 95% that we have? And maybe how do we invest it in these? Like, no, like that is not how we should be thinking. We should think about what are the issues that we need to address and what does it take to actually address these issues? Like, foundations should not be banks here. They already got a tax break. They should be
Mhm.
putting this money out there, saving democracy.
I need to do some research. I'm really curious even when the 5% and if it's ever changed at any point, whether it was higher or lower,
There has been
and where
in the
this
past.
5% figure came from.
There's been efforts in the past to increase it to like 6%.
Mhm,
And I think this was maybe a couple decades ago. And all
mhm,
the foundations got together and fought against it.
sure.
And of course, they have all the lawyers and everyone at their disposal. They were able to push it back. So there has been any sort of even minor reform efforts have been opposed by these funders.
If it could come from somewhere, what entities or organizations in the nonprofit space, and also obviously you would need a huge movement from the individual leaders at nonprofits. But how do you think if momentum could change, it could?
Well, we're gonna need some funding. Like we need some funders to actually understand this and start funding these movements, right? Which seems counterintuitive for them, But there are some really great movements that are happening. For example, the philanthropy project, which I'm involved in, is to address like donor advice funds and others. There's other people who've been trying to push legislation through, like the ACE Act, which is trying to do some reform around donor advice funds as well. There's people doing things like half my DAF, for example, which is encouraging people to like give out at least like half of the money that they've been squirreling away in donor advice funds, Patriotic Millionaire. So there are groups that have been doing things. The challenge has been that many of these organizations that have been trying to reform philanthropy don't get funded, right? Or they're still beholden to many of these funders. And so they can't be as radical as they should be and as they need to be in order to be effective.
Interesting. I just pulled up all of those. So I'm like, this is an opportunity for me to learn, of course, too. And so I just pulled up the links to all those philanthropyproject.net. The ASAC comes up. I'm pulling up the Accelerating Charitable Efforts Act. I pulled up the halfmydaft.com, and I also have patrioticmillionaires.org. We'll put the links in the blog. I appreciate you sharing that. You're speaking a lot about from the foundation side. Just to quote it correctly, I pulled up, I mean, just a reference, I looked at it, but the latest, are you familiar with givingusa.org? So their latest giving by source, foundations 109.81 billion, which is 19% of total giving. Corporations 44 billion, which is 7%. Bequests 6 billion, let's call it 8%. Individuals 392 billion, which is 66%. So also, if there's a individual listening to this podcast that's running their organization, how do you think knowing this kind of data and currently also where the state of it, because there could be macro things and movements that can happen on the foundation side, but again, that's only equating to 19%. Of course, I follow you. If we can move the 5% to 6% or 10% or 20%, that, you know, maybe could double that. But even if that doubled from 109 billion, let's call it, we have 220 billion. Still the bulk, almost 400 billion, 392 billion, 66% is from individuals. So I'm curious, what's your perspective on that? And what success have you seen? What are do's and do nots for organizations to be successful on the individual giving side, since that represents such a large percentage of overall giving? And maybe those metrics are skewed, and you could talk about that too if they are.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to say regarding this, right? The foundations, yeah, they may comprise like a smaller proportion than individuals, but they have a much greater influence on the sector than individuals do. Right. And so we have been caught up in this sort of spiral where we've been at the mercy of the whims of foundations. And so they exert an oversized influence here. And so they need to understand that, right? There's also, we need to disaggregate the data as well. Where are these individuals supporting, right? Because the reality is that for many small organizations led by communities of color, for example, or by disabled people, trans people, LGBTQIA people, and so on, there is going to be a heavier reliance on institutional funders like foundations because of like the wealth disparity. How wealth has been built in this country means that people of color and people on marginalized background are going to have less wealth to give out and to be individual donors. So the majority of individual donors are white and they're going to give to certain causes. They're not going to necessarily give to organizations led by communities of color, right? Or disabled people or whatever. And so when when we say things like 60% or 80% of philanthropic dollars are from individuals without really understanding the disaggregation and the nuances around that, then we can actually cause a lot more harm because now we're blaming, let's say, an organization that's led by, people of color. It's like, well, why aren't you getting more individuals? Why aren't you getting like when they comprise the majority of philanthropic dollars? My last few organizations, like 90% of our funding came from foundations, right? Not that we weren't out there reaching out and getting individual donors, but we didn't have the same sort of community of donors to build from. Also, the work that we were doing, it was harder. Like capacity building and leadership, it's going to be harder to get people to understand that versus other causes that would tug at the heartstrings of rich, mostly white donors more. So we really have to understand the nuances when we talk about this.
I appreciate you sharing that. And it's good to break down when you see these big picture statistics and rattle off numbers, what's actually lurking behind the scenes. So I appreciate that. The other, interesting point I've always, wow, as I look at it, this really dropped. It's still the biggest, but giving by, and it's so hard to nonprofits by category, right? But religion is accounting for 23% of all dollars, right? So I always
Yeah.
found that I swear when I was looking at these before starting Charity Charge and just trying to understand the industry, it was up around 30%. I think that there's been a big shift there, but I'm gonna look closer into that. I wanna following along with what you're saying, I wanna come back. One of the things, and we're gonna get to your book too, right? But what's on I'm gonna do a quick screen share as well. You have a section on your website, so if this is your homepage, of course, and you have a section here, report crappy funders. I just think that this is the greatest. Okay. I really appreciate that you put this together. I'm going to read off a couple of these. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your deeper thoughts or any anecdotes, whatever comes top of mind. I'm going to scroll down. Number 20, having ridiculous and nonsensical questions on impact. One funder literally asked, quote, how will this grant allow you to scale your impact? It was for $1,000.
Yeah. I
And
I
also
think this.
related too, because, a lot of our audience, I mean, I think what's good here too is as we're trying to grow the podcast, obviously our audience and where this gets put out the most too is the few thousand organizations that we work with. But I think it's also important if there's people that are listening to this that aren't running a nonprofit, but they're just on that other side. So it helps the individual understand the perspective and the challenges that someone running a nonprofit goes through.
Yeah, a lot of funders have oversized sense of importance, Like they will ask like how are you going to transform the community with this $5,000 grant? And of course, we have been trained to BS these types of questions. We're like, "Oh yeah, thanks to your money, we're going to be able to scale our impact this way and serve." And like, no. The honest answer is, well, you allowed us to pay 1 week's worth of rent for our operations. Okay, like that, right? But, like, they do that. It's really silly, and then over a long period of time, like, we start thinking that this is normal, and one of the things that I try to do with this book is to get people to snap people out of this, and we need to start thinking a lot bigger and to be more ambitious in our work. So, in the book, I talk about, like, a Juicero, which was a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine, and it was $700, and you buy these proprietary packets of cut up fruit and vegetables, and it squeezes out 1 glass of juice per packet. And Bloomberg did an investigation where they discovered that you can just take the packets and cut them and squeeze them by hand and get about the same amount of juice, but faster. So they wrote about this, and Juicero just went bankrupt. But before it did, it was boasting that it had $125 million in venture capital. And it had like 50 full-time engineers working to design this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine. So unless funders are willing to invest the same amount that venture capitalists are investing in a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine, I don't know why they're expecting impact on the scale that they think $5,000 would do. And I also want nonprofits to really just like have the audacity of this Wi-Fi connected juicing machine and add a zero or two to their asks and to their budgets, because chances are their work is way more important than a Wi-Fi connected juicing machine.
I would say that's definitely one of the biggest things that I've seen is asking for more.
Yeah, asking for
You know?
more
I
and,
mean, the bigger
and also
aspirations,
getting out of
yes.
this, like, gratitude philosophy. Like I said, we've been trained to be extremely grateful, and we do this in fundraising too. Fundraising individual donors. We've been trained to put everyone on a pedestal, to treat them like heroes. There's literally blog posts about how to treat your donors like heroes and the importance of making them feel like heroes and the importance of using the word you, for example, as one technique. When you write your appeal letter, when you write your individual acknowledgement letters, you use the word you. You did this. Because of you, we could not have done this without you, and so on. Right? Over time, it just like creates this philosophy. This is like among many funders that they are saviors, that they're heroes. And what we should be doing is actually having this shift towards let's actually be partners with our individual donors as well as our foundation partners. And that means having some more difficult conversations, including where wealth came from. And maybe these donors should, like, I don't know, pay more taxes and return stolen land and make reparation for slavery versus just like constantly extracting and hoarding wealth and then giving a little bit of it back. And then we're expected to write handwritten thank you notes.
Well, I don't want to disagree with you on facts of what's happened throughout this country and going back, even before America was founded and other countries and, what's been going on for throughout human civilization. How though, when I hear it and I'm trying to understand it and use this obviously podcast as an opportunity for me to learn and everyone to learn and have a open conversation, how do you do that in a way that the person on the other end can not feel guilted or shamed but understand and you kinda come to some mutual understanding?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we need to provide opportunities for people to engage in these conversations. We have not. We've had the assumption that they will get so offended if we bring up any issues of injustice here that they'll just run screaming, away from it. So then we don't give them any opportunities to do this. And I think that has been doing a disservice to many of these funders and donors. In the book, I mentioned one of the donors to my organization, he came to me and was like, you know what? I appreciate the handwritten thank you notes, but like I don't need them anymore. Like, please stop wasting your time writing handwritten thank you notes. And I was like, okay, well, what would you like? Like, what would make this meaningful partnership for you? He's like, well, I heard that you're attending a undoing racism training for 2 days. Like, can I attend that with you? And I said, yeah, if you can pay for that, yeah, come along. Join the team. We can do this. So he attended like the 2 day intense undoing racism training where we learn about white privilege and slavery and redlining and all this stuff. And it was a very intense experience, and many of the attendees actually like ended up crying because of the guilt and shame and all this stuff. So I checked in with him later and I said, how was that? He's like, that was one of the hardest things I went through. And I'm so glad I did it because I had no idea. And I could imagine that very few nonprofits actually invited him to this type of conversation. We don't even think to. And many of our donors are like ready for these conversations. They yearn for it, but we just treat them like toddlers who can't handle a difficult conversation. And that is not helpful for them or for the causes we're trying to address.
I appreciate that response. I think that drills down to a lot of the crux of where the conversation needs to go, and organizations can feel that to create a sense of more connectivity and community with their funders as opposed to just this power struggle dynamic that you've talked about. And you've referenced the book, but I wanna specifically highlight that this is titled Reimagining Nonprofits and Philanthropy: Unlocking the Full Potential of a Vital and Complex Sector. So thanks for putting this out. My copy's in the mail, as I mentioned. I could have been a more prepared interviewer. We had our first child about 3 months ago, so I've been
Oh my gosh,
back.
congrats, Steven.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been back at work running charity charge from a distance. I have a good team here, but I've also been caught up with that, so I haven't been as on the ball with it.
It's okay. The book is a great teething tool for toddlers, just in
Yes,
case. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, he's very advanced, little Henry. He's already starting to read, so I'm sure he'll appreciate it. Talk to me a little bit more, but, we've talked about the scarcity mindset. We've talked about individuals at running organizations being willing to have these deeper conversations with their funders, kind of challenging the status quo, focusing on just the overall how to navigate beyond the systemic issues that are facing nonprofits and the whole mindset of the power struggle between funders and nonprofits. What are some other areas in this book that you're really proud about? Because in here, I know you cover a bunch of different chapters. So, what are some other things that we're missing?
Yeah. I have a chapter called The Nine Horsemen of Nonprofit and Philanthropic Ineffectiveness. And it goes through like some of the challenges that that just underlie many of these issues that we've been dealing with. So one of them is like the suppressed imagination. I think over time, many of us just stop believing in our visions. We stop believing that we can actually create an equitable world. And we think that the world is always going to be crappy, and our job as nonprofits is to make it 10% less crappy every year. And we need to start actually thinking about a society that we want to have, right? And we need to start being unapologetic in those visions. Like I would love for us to just go full force into having society where there's universal education and universal healthcare and childcare and like all these things that we've been fighting for so long. And but we just think we're just never gonna get there. So restoring imagination is really important. We also need to start thinking about like how we've been like one giant white moderate sector. The white moderate is what Dr. King, from his letter from our Birmingham jail, said. He said like the white moderate is like the biggest threat towards justice. It's not the people marching and burning crosses. It's like the very nice individuals who are like, well, I believe in your vision. I believe in a just world, but like, can you be nicer? Can you be more civil? Can you not like burn bridges? That type of deal. And we see a lot of that in this sector, and we're at risk of being one giant white moderate sector. The other thing is that we love toxic intellectualizing. So we always think that if we just have a logic model or a theory of change or a better communication plan or branding or whatever, that we're actually doing something constructive. And we need to really snap out of it. The pendulum has swung way too far onto one side, where we believe that research and white papers and summits is somehow as effective, if not more so, than taking action and organizing. So yeah, I mean there's lots of things I can rant about, and I do in this book.
I'm curious, outside of the book, one of the
Yeah.
themes that keeps coming up as I talk to different nonprofit leaders is around the board. And I think it's an interesting question to kind of, well, I hope it's an interesting question, but I guess that's a bit of my ego just coming out. You'll let me know, and the listeners will decide if it's a good question or not, or topic. When I think about the pure structure of a nonprofit versus a for profit, the board of a nonprofit, just from the underpinnings, the legality, how an organization is set up, the board plays unbelievably important role. What is your perspective on the structure of a board, how it is today, kind of the legal uh, responsibilities and the power that a board has, and and then how have you seen organizations navigate that and actually build successful boards? Because I have run across so many leaders of nonprofits that are doing believe in the work, they know the mission, but they've got a really bad board, and they really struggle with actually growing that organization because of that. On the other hand, there are groups that have gotten really great boards and have done really well. So I
Yeah.
punt that to you.
Yeah. There's a whole chapter in my book on boards, reimagining boards. And I have a rule of one thirds when it comes to boards. One third of boards in our sector are effective, one third are completely useless, and one third are actually destructive to their mission. So that means two-thirds of boards are actually useless or destructive here.
Mhm.
Right? And why wouldn't they be? I mean, we're talking about a structure where the people who have the least amount of knowledge and oftentimes the least amount of lived experience in the issues that the organization is trying to address now are given the most power to set strategies and to determine who is the ED and so.
This is where I think your point, and I'm gonna just interrupt you respectfully, just to add a little bit more fuel to the fire, as you talked about the power struggle and the challenges between funders and the organization. The board can create that same and or exacerbate the issue.
Absolutely. Boards, I've nearly quit several times because of my own boards, you know? The structure itself, not to say that not like all boards again are bad. Like there's some really great boards that use traditional structures, they use Robert's rules, whatever, and they can still be very good at it. But a lot of them are not effective. They've been leaving people behind, and there's certain things that have caused that. One is like this hyper focus on board members being contributors financially, or they must have access to wealth, and they need to be able to bring resources to the organization. And so what that means is that it favors rich, mostly white people to be on boards. That's why we have such a board diversity issue in the sector, is because we focus on money. and wealthy people tend to be white. So we really need to start thinking about restructuring boards and thinking about like exploring different board models. One group that I talked to in Saskatchewan, Canada, for example, like they pay their board members. I think they pay them like $155 per meeting each, right? They allocate 10,000 Canadian dollars every year to pay their board members. And it's an arts organization. And they were doing this because, well, artists are poor as hell usually, right? And so if you're an arts organization, you need artists to be on your board. But if they're poor, they may not have the time because they're always working. So paying them a little bit of money if you can, if it's legally allowed, because and I think in Canada there's some legal requirements around when you can pay and what type of organizations, whether it's a charity or a nonprofit, that you can pay board members or not. In the US, I don't think we have that issue. And also you look at like corporation, they pay board members all the time. Like, a lot of money too. These Fortune 500 companies, you can make like $50,000-$80,000 joining a board a year just attending a few meetings a year. And for some reason, it's blasphemy for us to think about paying board members in nonprofit. So we have a lot of these sacred cows that we need to like re-examine. Like another sacred cow among boards is like the board must be the ones select the ED or the CEO, right? But why? I mean, you barely get to see this person. I mean, the staff are the ones who have to work with this individual or like co-individuals every single day. Why wouldn't they have as much or more of a say in who is like the leadership at this organization? But no, we've decided that board members are the ones, and then they oftentimes ostracize, alienate staff from that process. They isolate the staff so the staff are not able to provide much of an input on who gets hired as the ED or CEO. That makes no sense. The board and staff should be working together in co-equal partnership to hire the director or the co-directors or whatever.
Really good points. I agree with a lot of that. I appreciate you sharing it. When we think about another question or topic I wanted to get your input on is when you think about how many nonprofits that are out there, and then you also, in aggregate, let's just say in the US, and then you focus on any given city. We talk about the challenges maybe for funding right now. What I've also seen a theme of is it gets back to a little bit of the scarcity mindset that you had talked about. I find nonprofit organizations one to the next not wanting to talk to other organizations, not wanting to partner up, maybe also not wanting to partner, merge organizations, etc. So, what's been your perspective of how and the mindset of do organizations like to work together or do they just have such a siloed approach to running their organization and their community?
I call it the nonprofit Hunger Games. This is what we do. And we can't really blame nonprofits for playing the Hunger Games and constantly wanting to survive because of the way that the funding dynamics are.
Hmm.
Funders encourage competition because of their grant process is highly competitive,
Hmm.
and the philosophies of there's only so much money to go around and other type of BS philosophies means that many of us are constantly just in this survival mode. And then the way that we've been trained to do fundraising again is to like lift up individual donors and to be like the best at like we turn ourselves into like a mall or like the Sky Mall catalog, like
Hmm.
of individuals trying to get the most attention and the resources from people. So yeah, over a period of time, it creates this hyper competitive environment here. But that is not how we should be thinking about it. And we can't effectively address societal issues if we're constantly in this sort of competitive sort of way of operating. There are signs of movements, so the community-centric fundraising movement, which I've been involved with and have been a part of founding it, is to really change the way that we do fundraising. Right, including having these deeper conversations with donors, but also in ending the Hunger Games. And there's examples of organizations supporting one another. Like in Seattle, for example, a funder decided to give $50,000 grants at the beginning of the pandemic to nonprofits, and several of these nonprofits declined the funding. They said, "We really appreciate this funding, but we know some other nonprofits are not doing as well. Would you mind giving it to them instead?" Like, it's completely blasphemous, but really inspiring, right? Nonprofits have been doing really cool stuff over here. We had like our Give Big, which was like our one day of giving over here. And I remember one time an organization was like, "Hey, we really appreciate your donation, but for this year's Give Big, here's like 5 partner organizations who are doing amazing work. We hope that you will contribute to them." And it was just mind blowing that we can do that. We can, when we can, and we should be doing that for one another.
As you mentioned that, one of the innovations in the nonprofit sector that's really took on steam from my perspective, probably starting around 2010 on, is the concept of these giving days. What it sounds like, obviously you've seen success come from them. What's your take on that model? We have one in Austin. I mean, it seems like almost every, it started in different areas. I'm blanking right now where the first one was. And
Yeah.
then kind of from what I saw behind, like, because payment I'm on the issuing side, in doing, credit cards and payments for nonprofits. On the acceptance side, as the model started to take off, there were a lot of companies that said, "Hey, this is an opportunity to make a shitload of money on the payment processing." So they basically went and took their software that powered these giving days, would go and sell into the area community foundations and say, "Hey, you're the centralized hub in your city. We're going to provide the software and some support to help you market this and basically enroll all of your nonprofits. But every dollar that's donated gets processed through the foundation and basically our payment processing." So they were able to capture a piece because it's like in the credit card game, you want to have as many dollars as possible flow through your processing system. That's been kind of an interesting piece. And I think a little bit behind kind of the trend of it. Not to say that there hasn't been good from it, but yeah, there's always like you look for where the incentives are in a lot of these things. And that's part of my take of why there's been and had been a big push for these cumulative centralized fundraising efforts.
Yeah. I do have to run in a couple minutes, pick up my kids, Steven.
That's really important. We can
Yeah.
wrap it up uh here. We can leave people on a cliffhanger for that or whatnot.
Yeah, but let's just say that I have mixed feelings about these one-day Hunger Games
Yeah,
here. They do some good.
yeah.
Some organizations, and also it's good for the general public, right? For us, like, I think it's good branding for the sector to be like, "Hey, just donate," and people understand, like, Giving Tuesday or whatever. But I'm also mixed because, like, it is a Hunger Games of
Mhm.
nonprofits inundating donors, around this time, and I don't know what necessarily what the returns are, over the long run, whether that's effective, whether we should spread this.
I think that if it can be done well, one of the value adds is it's a way for organizations to, or at least the promise to the organizations are, it's a way to attract and bring in new donors to your organization, that it might be the first time they've learned about it, donated, and then if you have the capacity to engage them, you can build that relationship for bigger gifts in the future. But with that said, I'm happy to wrap up this episode. Vu, thank you so much for being on the Charge Show and having a really honest conversation and just being very open with sharing your thoughts, perspectives, and opinions. I really appreciate it, and I welcome new ideas and new perspectives. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Steven.